Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Good evening. I'm Metta Spencer in Toronto, and here we are again with another in our series called Talk About Saving the World. Tonight, I have an interesting conversation lined up for those of you who are interested in the Arctic, and who, if you don't know much about the Arctic, and I certainly don't, we're going to find out more tonight. I have two friends here who are going to share their knowledge about the Arctic with us. And one is Dr. Adele Buckley, who is a physicist, an engineer, is an inventor, and has been very active in leading the Canadian Pugwash group for a number of years. Today she's trying to retreat a little bit from all her busy job of leading that organization, but there's where I've known her most. And the other participant is Ernie Regehr. Ernie Regehr is the founding director of Project Plowshares, which is an organization that is sponsored, or at least has largely been sponsored by the Canadian Council of Churches, I believe, and is based in Waterloo, Ontario. It's existed for a couple of decades, I think now, and it does very interesting research and advocacy with regard to the economy and other ways in which we should be supporting peace and demilitarization. The term plowshares, of course, refers to the biblical statement about beating your swords into plowshares. And that's what we're all trying to do these days. Well, one of the places where the swords are being beaten into plowshares is in the Arctic. And part of the challenges going on in the Arctic have to do with the changes brought about by global warming, which of course the people in the polar extremes are finding most troubling, are affected by it most. And so it affects our security in various ways, because we have various countries in the Arctic. Unlike the situation in the Antarctic, we have a number of countries that surround the North Pole and have to work out various new arrangements for their relations and travel and that sort of thing. So, Adele Buckley, hello.
Hello. How are you, Metta?
I'm very well, and it's lovely to have you here. Adele, why don't you give us an overview of what the heck's going on in the Arctic, and is there anything that we should be worried about? I hear all the time references to competition among various countries, and maybe the Russians are coming to get us from the Arctic or something. So what are the problems, or what are the challenges going on in the Arctic?
Well, I think all of those things are sort of fear-mongering, because it is not true. The Arctic is a model of cooperation. It's not because all those countries, which happen to include the US and Russia, which are big world powers and not necessarily happy with each other, but in the Arctic, in order to get anything done, you really need to help each other. And so a methodology of keeping sovereign at the same time as cooperating has been established. And I would say that the world should pay attention to how this works and see if it could work for other parts of the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So what do you see happening? I think I want to show, if possible, we ought to have a good look at the map of the Arctic, the North Pole looking downward. Are we seeing this now?
I see it. And a lot of people are not not really used to seeing, like looking down from the North Pole. But
I'm not either. Are you guys seeing that on your screen now?
I'm seeing it, but I know you have a map of the ice, Metta, and I'm going to.
I'll show you that in a minute, but let's get oriented first. Now, I'm going to, can you see my pointer moving around here? Because that's Russia.
Mm-hmm.
Got that?
That's Russia.
The circle thing is the Arctic Circle.
Yeah, here's the North Pole here. And here's Canada, and here's Alaska. Here's the that's
Bering Strait.
Bering Strait. And over here, some places, St. John, Newfoundland. And let's see, here's Greenland, here's Scandinavia. Here you see Norway, Sweden, and Finland. And right here is something called the Kola Peninsula. And there's a city there called Murmansk, which is the main city. I had a look at it. It's a big looking city. It looked to me about the size of Hamilton from the size of the buildings. It's a city on this peninsula where there most of the Russian fleet, Northern Fleet, is based.
Metta, it's worth pointing out that all of the countries that have territory above the Arctic Circle, and you can see there that pink Iceland has a very slight bit of territory above the Arctic Circle.
Oh, that's right. That's right. It's just a little bit.
So it's those 8 countries that you see on the map there, from Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Finland, or Sweden, Finland, and Russia. Those 8 countries make up the Arctic Council.
Okay. Now, what is the Arctic Council?
They're involved in. I mean, the Arctic Council isn't a governing. I mean, it's not a collective government of the Arctic, but it's the forum through which the countries of the Arctic cooperate most, and they've developed. Adele was talking about the level of cooperation in the Arctic, and there are a number of specific agreements that reflect that. There's most recent is a fisheries agreement, in which also involves major fishing powers outside of the Arctic, but which would fish in the Arctic, in which there's an agreement to prohibit fishing until there's sufficient scientific work done to establish what are sustainable rates of fishing. Oil spills agreement, search and rescue agreement amongst the 8 countries, a Coast Guard forum that involves all of those countries. So that there's quite a number of institutional linkages between those countries, facilitated through the work of the Arctic Council.
I'd like to just say something about that, because Arctic Council Canadians had a fairly big hand in originating the Arctic Council back in the 1990s. And I think we should be quite proud of that. Franklin Griffiths was one of the people. The other thing to think about is that the Arctic Council does mostly economic things and environmental things. And they specifically do not do anything military. So that means it's rather difficult, because it's not a comprehensive organization. But in any case, it also has a lot of observers, and it has all the indigenous groups represented too. So it's a very good organization, but it has limitations.
I've heard of the what is it, the Inuit Council or something like that. I guess there are indigenous peoples in all of these territories historically connected. Is that right?
Well, there's the Inuit Circumpolar Council, ICC, which has Alaska, Canada, Greenland, Russia, and its Arctic peoples. And they do a lot of cooperative things. They meet yearly or even oftener than that, and they have offices in all the countries, and the head office is in Greenland. And they also, from our point of view and the security point of view, they have suffered a lot due to Arctic nuclear matters like mining and other things related to military activities in the Arctic. And so back in the 80s, they issued a document, a declaration, and all signed it, that they wished to pursue a nuclear-free Arctic. And they meant also weapons and mining and everything nuclear in the Arctic.
Okay. Well, that hasn't happened, has it?
No, but they should reissue it. Apparently, it still stands as their declaration, but it's a little bit outdated in its wording if you look at it.
Okay. And in fact, I believe, and here you can correct me, I remember that back before he became the General Secretary of the Soviet Union, Mikhail Gorbachev was promoting the idea of a nuclear-free or a peace zone in the Arctic. And I gather he meant something more than a nuclear weapon-free zone. But it is that, I think, is something you've been working on a lot, Adele, is promoting the idea of a nuclear weapon-free zone. Is that the same thing that Gorbachev was proposing, or what would that involve?
Well, Gorbachev came in, relatively early there, and Russian and American scientists even wanted it. What they meant is that it should be free of any weapons testing, launching, anything that would make it a military activity involving nuclear weapons. It doesn't mean, and hasn't meant, in current times or any other times, nuclear powered submarines. They seem to be necessary in the Arctic due to going under the ice, and they are somewhat of an environmental danger, but that is not what nuclear weapon-free zone is about.
And that's
sorry.
Go ahead, Adele, if you had more.
Okay, well, there's a lot more, but I think one of the most important things about nuclear weapon-free zone is that it's important to sort of begin countries to think about this and begin to talk about it together as soon as possible. And it's a difficult thing, although there are already in the United Nations treaty system 7 or 8 or so nuclear weapon-free zones. So it isn't an unknown thing, and it's a formally defined thing, but you can work toward it and gradually get to the point where the UN and the countries that are involved, could do it. And one thing that you could do right away is if you are a country, put it in your national Arctic policy that you aspire to have a nuclear weapon-free Arctic. Denmark has done that. Canada should do it. It wouldn't be against anything that they are doing with respect to NATO or any other allies. It simply is a statement of aspiration for the future. Then another thing that could happen is that this is difficult because Russia and the US are obviously, look at the map, part of the Arctic. So one thing that could happen, because it has already happened, in that all the other countries have met all the conditions for nuclear weapon free. They don't station nuclear weapons on their territory, etc. So they could, the non-nuclear weapon states, so-called, they could form a nuclear weapon-free zone on their own, and that could include their waters. But this is not something that is happening at the moment. It is something that we Canadian Pugwash promote as often as possible, but it is not an advanced prospect. It's just a recommended one, because
it's worth noting that in Gorbachev gave his famous Murmansk speech in 1987 when he called for that zone of peace and nuclear weapon-free area. But of course, he didn't include the Kola Peninsula in that in his call for a nuclear weapon-free zone. And you were pointing it out earlier, Metta, and that of course is the Kola Peninsula is in the Arctic, above the Arctic Circle, and it hosts the main U.S. naval fleet. That yeah, right there it is.
Yeah,
so
I've
that's
got
the
to
home of
point
the.
this out. This little thing sticking
Yeah,
out there
yeah,
seems.
that's right, and
Oh,
that's the home of the U.S. Or the Russian Northern Fleet, which is its main nuclear armed submarine force is based there as well. And so when that submarine force, first of all, it's based there, and when it heads out into to the Atlantic or the Pacific, it traverses the Arctic. So I mean, as Adele has rightly pointed out, there are non-nuclear weapon states in the Arctic, and they could declare their territories as nuclear weapon free. But the Russia will have nuclear weapons in the Arctic for some time to come. That arsenal will decline as global stocks of nuclear weapons decline, and because the Russians have a major nuclear presence in the Arctic, that means that American submarines also patrol the Arctic on a regular basis. So there's nuclear related activity that carries on. One of the issues that Gorbachev talked about was a zone of peace, and Adele mentioned Franklin Griffiths, prominent Canadian analyst on the Arctic, political scientist, and he put forward the idea of the Central Arctic Ocean being demilitarized on the surface. The subsurface is not going to be demilitarized for some time because submarines go there. But on the surface, the Arctic Ocean, the Central Arctic Ocean, has effectively been demilitarized until now, and that's because of climate and ice, of course. So nature and geography have accomplished the demilitarization of that ocean. And Frank Griffiths had a great innovative idea and suggested that, well, why don't we now politically do what the geography and the environment have done for us so far, and that is to keep the surface of the Arctic free from military combat activity and capabilities.
Well, what would they keep there anyway? I mean, it would be airfields.
Well, in the Central Arctic Ocean, that would be a maritime thing primarily. Aren't islands there, so it would.
No, but you just say the surface. You mean regular ships?
Yeah, the surface
ships and that kind of.
The surface of the ocean would be kept as a.
We already.
Piece.
Yeah, we already know that there are a lot of military ships in the surface of the Arctic Ocean, but they are there for various reasons. But one of them is going to be very necessary when search and rescue activities are required. So it's a support thing as well as a military thing. But unless there is some actual combat, my understanding of militarized means that the Arctic is demilitarized because there's no active combat or dispute of any sort. Therefore, it's demilitarized. But that could change, and in fact, it's a worry because there's more activity. For instance, if you remember the map way back in the area near Greenland and then across over to the UK and near Iceland, there's been even in the last few weeks, a huge amount of military activity on NATO's part. Mm-hmm. And they've all been, it's been one of the major things they've done, and that's very near to the Arctic. It could easily impinge on the Arctic. And once things like that start getting into the Arctic, as opposed to just staying in the North Atlantic, there's potential trouble.
I think it depends on your definition of demilitarization. There's a great deal of military activity in the Arctic Ocean along the coasts. That zone of peace was more a reference to the Central Arctic Ocean, where there's much less activity. But in the more coastal areas throughout, and Russia in particular has a large number of bases strung all the way from the Pacific Ocean side of the Bering Strait all the way across its landmass to the Kola Peninsula and some of the islands. There's a great many military facilities and air bases and so forth there. But it's true that for all of the Arctic Ocean states, the primary role of their military forces there is aid to the civil authority. It's the civilian authorities that have the primary responsibility for managing the Arctic, managing marine traffic, ensuring that environmental and national obligations and regulations are followed. And so these are civilian responsibilities, and including air patrols. But they rely on military forces as the ones that have the assets that are able to actually operate up there. They rely on those forces, so that the military really acts there on behalf of civilian authorities. And all of the Arctic states agree that in the current climate, even though Ukraine notwithstanding, that they perceive no military threats to national sovereignty or territorial integrity of states in the Arctic. And the role of the military forces is not so much to defend national territory as to aid civil authorities in carrying out the responsibilities of sovereignty.
So it sounds like they are just functioning as a Coast Guard should.
They have a kind of a constabulary role. That's right.
And there is something called the Coast Guard Forum, which also has its own specific duties and supports. I think we should think about the differences between Russia and the Canadian side of the Arctic. Russia has lots and a big population, and a lot of it is north of the Arctic Circle. It's sort of what would be important to Russia is to have a government and so on presence there and restore some things that people say it has not even been restored since World War II. So they supposedly have good reason to do a lot of work in the Arctic, including build a whole lot of new things. And they're very interested in the oil and gas there. They and China together have recently shown that you can support liquid natural gas shipments through the Arctic and so on. So it's not entirely unfeasible, I guess, that Russia is very active and very dominant in the Arctic, because the US seems to have sort of ignored it. I mean, Russia has many icebreakers and much equipment, and the US has not put much equipment in a comparable way. They have one icebreaker, I think, that is functioning there all the time, and so on. Not doing it.
That imbalance is logical, obviously, because Russia has a much larger, lengthy coastline, and the United States has a very, very short Arctic coastline, and it has military forces in Alaska, but they're much more oriented towards the Pacific and to military issues there. So you have a very long Arctic coast on the part of
along here from this is Russia, right?
Yeah, all of that. Okay. And compared that to the Alaska coast, it's very, very so the Russians have about 40 plus icebreakers operating there. The Americans currently have the capacity for one. Canada has about half dozen. Furthermore, Russia has about 20% of its economy is really based on Arctic activity, and as Adele has already said, a significant population in the north, unlike Canada. Canadian population is significant in the sense of importance, but not in large numbers. And so one of the realities that I think that we have to come to terms with that is that indefinitely Russia will be the dominant presence in the Arctic. There isn't. It has much greater military capability, and none of the other states in the Arctic and the U.S. in particular are going to remotely rival the presence of actual Arctic bases, for example, in the north. The Americans just
let's take a look at this thing. Because, the thing that reason I put this up is it shows how much the sea ice has retreated.
Yeah.
And that's going to be, look at this. I don't think this little red line shows up much, but I'll trace it around here. See where that is where the ice used to be, and you can see where it is now. So it has shrunk by, maybe a third or a quarter, something like that.
Well, but the point, you can also see, Metta, that the white part, the ice part there, and where it used to be, those have been the areas of permanent ice. So that's a part of the Arctic Ocean that has never been used by anybody,
right.
Civilian or military shipping.
Yeah.
Can we look at the map again?
Sorry?
Can we have the map again?
You want to see this again? All right, sure.
I think there's a lot to say about that.
You want to see this one? Or the ice map or the other one?
No, this one, I like this one. There's a little bit of unfinished business about, well, a lot about Arctic nuclear weapon-free zone. But if you, each nuclear weapon-free zone, which is a treaty, and you can see there the Kola Peninsula, if you recall where it is, sort of
near someplace.
Near Scandinavia. It is possible that...
Further up.
Where is it?
Just keep going
further up.
Oh, that's it right there. I see.
Okay. Now, that isn't that far from the North Atlantic, and it is possible that a nuclear weapon-free zone could exclude that area and just have all the other areas. That would allow Russian submarines to continue in the base and so forth. Now, this is a sort of creative thinking that may not be possible. There's another UN concept called innocent transit. If you're not there working for military purpose and you notify the right people, you can move your submarines anywhere you want, or any other military thing. So the innocent transit idea will help in maybe achieving that in the future. But the main thing I want to point out, because this map is interesting, it's September 2018, like now. This is the least ice all year long. And then, of course, now it's beginning to grow again. And that other line is, the least ice at 20 years ago or whenever it was.
That red line.
Yeah, but also the ice that's the cover ice. But the thickness of the ice is hugely different, even in the mid-Arctic.
Around here, even here?
It ever used to be, yes. It used to be really, really thick, like multi-year thick, and never melting. But now there's a lot of ice that's just 1 year ice, and so there's far less volume of ice. It's not just that surface picture that you see. Not only that, but for the first time ever, they've noticed ice breaking up north of Greenland, which was thought to be the iciest place in the entire anywhere. So it really is melting. And what's so important about that? Well, it's very important because it affects the entire planet, because that dark and warmer Arctic Ocean doesn't reflect sunlight and warmth, anything like the ice used to, the greenhouse gas effect would be trying to warm up everything. But on the other hand, the ice would reflect it back. But the less ice there is, the less it does. And the dark water simply absorbs it and gets warmer. And not only that, just recently it's been observed that the so-called warmer North Atlantic Ocean is busy encroaching into the Arctic, and the currents are changing all over the place. So what does this mean? It means that the Arctic, which used to control things like the upper atmosphere jet streams, it's not happening. the way it used to. They're supposedly a lot weaker, and that means that we have sort of strange and extreme weather that we never expected, where we can expect to have the Arctic is influencing the entire rest of the world because the Arctic Ocean is part of the ocean, the whole ocean. There isn't really many different oceans. It's all one big ocean in the planet. And so if it happens in the Arctic, it happens to all of us. And it's a significant thing that the ice is going away, because that just means everything is warming up faster, the faster the ice melts. And it making the Arctic itself warmer. And there's something called permafrost. I don't know if any of us have heard of that, but northern Russia and northern Canada, US, and also northern Canadian lakes and northern Russian lakes are all warming up so that the permafrost, stuff that was normally frozen below the surface, it's not frozen anymore. And that means that it's coming, the stored carbon dioxide and the stored methane, which is a really bad greenhouse gas, they're all coming up and increasing the ability of the climate to warm some more. Now, everyone hoped that the permafrost would stay put, but in fact, it is not. And some of the methane coming out of lakes and shallow ocean, all you have to do is light a match and you get a flame. So
right here, someplace in this where's the Siberian Sea? Is this around someplace here? I understand that there are areas where it's coming up out of the ocean. They're big, you can go for miles, and there are big plumes of methane coming up out of the ocean that the researchers are studying. Where is that Siberian Sea? Is that it here?
Well, I thought it was more it is in there.
Not just land. It's also from the clathrates in the oceans are, it's a mixture of ice and methane together. And those things are melting and coming up in large amounts. So the question is, how long is it going to be before the whole darn thing blows, so to speak?
This is why they talk about runaway climate change when there's nothing that human society can do, which is a very gloomy thought, to reverse climate change or hold it where it is, because of effects like this. It's not an agreeable thought, but it is eye-opening, and it is something that we need to think about and get our own governments to and the whole nations of the earth to say we have to agree to do more than we are doing. And of course, the IPCC.
Now let's look at these because it seems to me clear that there are pluses and minuses to this thing. This global warming is going to, by melting the ice, it makes it easier for ships to get through. They didn't used to be able to go through. And here's a map showing the directions that some of the ships will be able to go. Now, here's Rotterdam. This northern passage around Russia means you can go to the Bering Strait that way. But now, here's this thing a little bit more complicated. If you leave from St. John's, Newfoundland, you can go through the Northwest Passage and all these islands up in Canada, wiggle your way through and get to the Bering Strait that way. And so tell us about this development. There's a lot of advantage to doing that, but seems to me that is pretty bad sign, because it means that's just affected by how much melting there is going on. Is that right?
Well, those shipping routes are obviously very attractive to China in particular, because if China wants to ship to Europe, I think it takes something like 10 or 11 days off shipping time, as opposed to going other route through the Suez Canal. So it's a very attractive thing there, but that very attractive for them to take those routes, and they've been through the Canadian Northwest Passage as well. I think that the one key point about this is that the development of much more extensive marine traffic throughout the Arctic Ocean, much of it going to destinations in the Arctic, not transiting through the Arctic. But the increase in traffic there has created a huge demand for search and rescue capability. Mm-hmm. And the search and rescue capability is very, very limited up there. The helicopters that are intended for it are based in the south, in Halifax and Winnipeg in particular, and aircraft in Trenton and so forth. So it takes a long time for those aircraft to get up there. So there's a big demand for search and rescue capability, for emergency response capability. Russia has been building up that capacity enormously because it really wants to build the infrastructure for its for that northeastern sea route, and they see the economic advantages of that. And I think it's Adele mentioned the Coast Guard Forum. That's the Coast Guard Forum agreement was also facilitated by the Arctic Council, and that's all of the Arctic Coast Guards have an agreement in which to do some coordination and cross-border assistance. And it's in infancy, but it's developing. And so it makes the point that Adele made initially, that for the Arctic to be effective, and it relies on a great deal of cooperation amongst the Arctic states. And this past May, the Arctic states were meeting in Ilulissat, Greenland, little town in Greenland, in which they renewed a declaration which they had agreed to in 2008. This is the 10th anniversary, and the Ilulissat Declaration is an explicit statement by the powers, the Arctic powers, that they will be bound by international law. They view existing international law, notably the law of the sea, as being a suitable and effective foundation for cooperation in the region, and a commitment to settling disputes and by peaceful means. It's a very significant.
Sorry, but now the law of the sea has mechanisms for dispute resolution built into it, or what? Or is
yes, it does. But and so that the states in the Ilulissat Declaration really reinforce the point that they don't see military conflict as being the means by which differences are going to be settled, and that's a significant element of a definition or of a security community, and that is if the states of a particular region can have a reasonable expectation that the political and territorial disputes that they face will not be resolved or will not be prosecuted by military means. That's a significant part of the definition of a stable security community. And so that the Arctic has that, and which is a major achievement that we
well, it also sounds like it would be facilitate promoting all these resolutions, whether you're talking about Franklin Griffith's idea of having the surface be demilitarized, or also nuclear. If they're determined they're not going to settle disputes by military means, then I need to keep stuff there. By the way, are there other kinds of military facilities there besides these nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines? I don't suppose the U.S. has nuclear weapons stationed in the Arctic.
No, it doesn't. But it does patrols there. But this, a thing that we also have to remember is that there's really no need for Russia to do a lot of patrolling by nuclear submarines that are capable of firing ballistic missiles, because they can hit any target on Earth from submarines based in their own territorial waters, right near the coast.
Around the Kola Peninsula, or they also have a fleet out in around Vladivostok and so on.
Yeah, and the Pacific Fleet. So they don't really need to become messing around in the Canadian Northwest Passage, for example, with nuclear missile submarines, because they have no strategic need for that kind for using that territory. They can do that from their own territory. And the Americans don't have the nuclear weapons based there, but they do have, as I say, anti-submarine or attack submarine patrols in the Arctic still.
Oh, isn't it? I assumed it by the word attack submarine, you meant a nuclear submarine that was equipped with nuclear weapons.
No, that's a different kind of submarine.
No, an attack submarine is nuclear powered, but not equipped with nuclear weapons.
Oh,
so ballistic missile submarine are equipped with the nuclear weapon. The attack submarines are intended to attack those
Slickums.
Let's go back.
Slickums submarine launched ballistic missiles.
Well, those are sea launched cruise missiles.
Yeah, okay.
That will be one. Anyway, there are definitely many kinds of submarines, but I think I wanted Ernie to tell us, but he didn't, that, well, you can tell the Ilulissat agreement for all these worthwhile cooperative things includes Russia and the US, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? The other thing is we really haven't reminded ourselves yet that Russia climate is really quite a bit different than the Canadian Arctic climate. And so the shipping route in the northern route across Russia will be used much more frequently than the one through the Northwest Passage for quite a while, simply because, and also the Arctic is so dangerous. It really is very dangerous. And the fact is that there's nothing that can really be done about it except explore more and get more data. I mean, even this year, a Russian tourist ship ran aground and had to be rescued. So we really need a lot more Arctic data. And we also need to note that you can only use this wonderful new 40% savings in trip time across the Arctic about 3 months of the year. The rest of the time, there's too much ice or it's really dark. I mean, if you could even have a total Arctic free of ice all year, it'd still be black as black can be with very, very little in the way of anything in the winter. So the economic activity in the Arctic is very specially challenged, and so we should take note of that. It's quite
important. They have a big population living in the Arctic of Russia, and I just don't know how they get those big cities. What do those people do? It shouldn't be much fun.
I think the point on what Adele was just saying is that I think the point of the concern and the developing up of an infrastructure and search and rescue is that the shipping, the trend is that the shipping season will steadily expand, and that the traffic will steadily expand, which is not to say that it suddenly is the same kind of traffic as goes through the Suez Canal. It's a long way from that, but the point is that it's an area of expanded and increasing shipping activity, and in addition to that, will gradually also include more extractive activity. Already includes economic activity in those cities that you were talking about. So there's a lot of marine traffic that that needs to supply settlements and so forth in the
well, also, I understand now, I don't know how many other countries are doing this, but we hear about China wanting to be able to go freely through the Arctic. And I think there was some kind of, they went toe to toe with Canada a couple of years ago because they wanted to go through without permission. Is this an issue? Should Canada want?
I think that was the U.S. that wanted to go without permission.
Oh, China did too.
I don't think that's a major issue. They routinely seek and get Canada's permission and Russia's permission. I mean, no ship goes freely through the Arctic. As Adele has been saying, it's a very difficult area to transit, and all rely heavily on the capacity of Arctic states to respond when they run into trouble. So it's
and trouble would be bumping into ice or
underground obstacles.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Both, and darkness.
You said that one of them ran aground recently. What aground to me means you run into a sandbar or something. What happened? Was
some kind of underground rock structure, I think.
Oh, yeah.
And they had to be taken off onto another ship, and it was successful in the sense that I'm sure there was economic damage, but no injury to people. So that was.
I'd like for you to speculate about or reflect on the challenges of all of the resource extraction that we hear about. I don't know how much is actually going on there, but when I hear about the Horizon thing that blew up in the Gulf of Mexico, and I think transferring a disaster of that kind to the Arctic, it would be multiply worse. What is the prospect of controlling and what's the plan for limiting?
Everyone knows there's no plan to help. I mean, to actually remove a spill or deal with a spill. There is no technique at the present. I mean, there's talk about it, and some companies are trying to do something, but there is no such technique for an oil spill in the Arctic. So
the Arctic Council has at least spawned the oil spills agreement, and so that there's some agreement amongst Arctic states that in the event of an oil spill, there would be means by which they would come to each other's aid.
Well, are they going to go ahead with it? Are they permitting companies to go drilling in? I guess it would be on the shelf of the continents.
Yeah, President Trump has just agreed within the last few weeks to restart drilling in the Arctic for resources, oil, whatever.
So that's
whereas it was stopped for quite a while.
So is that Beaufort Sea area, or where is that?
I'm not. I think it may be off the other side of the Bering Strait. I'm not sure, but
yeah,
I think it is the Beaufort Sea area. It's off of. Is there Prudhoe Bay or something like that? Anyway, but the fact is that many environmentalists have objected to it, and I think it's part of a marine protected area together with a marine park, but President Trump doesn't care about that. So his office has authorized to go ahead anyway.
But now the law of the sea doesn't cover that kind of thing. What does it cover?
Claims to territory.
Okay.
Your 12-mile limit for you, that's your territory. Then you can have a further out to several hundred miles of exclusive economic zone where you have control about what goes on there, if you can prove that it's really an extension of your continental shelf. And that's why all the countries have taken all sorts of data.
Yeah, so all countries have this 200-mile exclusive economic zone, which is not their national territory, but over which they control economic activity. And then the continental shelf extension is confined to the seabed and access.
It's like the continent goes out shallow, and then drops and you know there's a certain line where you know that you're beyond the edge of the
shelf.
continent. Is that right?
And so there's a great deal of scientific work going on now, measuring continental shelves of each of the countries, and there's a mechanism within the law of the sea to resolve those conflicts when there are overlapping claims.
So any mining or drilling of oil or something like that, or gas, would take place on those shelves and not in the deep part of the Arctic Ocean. Is that right?
It's certainly thought so, because these resources are not thought to be, you know, in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. Mm. But the UN has quite a backlog of adjudication to do. It's going to be quite some time before that structure that's put in place, which everyone agrees to, cooperation again, that it'll happen, and they agree that they will abide by those rules, but they haven't evaluated all the data, and they won't get to it for a while.
Metta, I wanted to make a point about the cooperation, and particularly military cooperation. I mean, there's a lot of concern and some alarmism that you see in the media about the militarization of the Arctic and Russia's dramatic increase. It may be dramatic, but it's still not nearly at what it was at Cold War levels. But the point is that there is more and more military activity in the Arctic, much of it, as I was saying, related to aid to civil authorities. But for that, in order to prevent that from becoming areas of conflict and particularly of alarmism and which would generate military races and so forth, there needs to be a great deal of cooperation and conversation and negotiation and consultation amongst the militaries of the North. Canada at one point initiated meetings of the Arctic Chiefs of Defense Staff. Those are all of the Arctic Ocean countries, the Chiefs of Defense Staff coming together to meet. That only happened a couple of years because then it was stopped by the Ukraine events and cut off cooperation with Russia on that. More recently, there is something called the Arctic Security Forces Roundtable, and that's all of the 8 Arctic states that we identified in the map earlier. They come together. They've been coming together annually since 2011 to have consultations on their military developments and force structures in the Arctic and so forth. So I think those are critically important conversation and dialogues that have to have if we're going to have any confidence that as the military activity picks up, in which it is picking up in the Arctic, it doesn't decline into competitive military operations, and that the states of the region have reasonable confidence that they're not being outstripped by others. And Russia will always dominate the military in the Arctic, but that's why it's doubly important for countries like Canada and the US to have ongoing conversation with Russia about their military activity.
I want to talk a bit, about China and what it's doing there, because I think we have not really risen to be aware of how interested China is in the Arctic. They just issued a new Arctic policy in early January, and stating that they believe China to be a near Arctic country. And if you remember the map you just put up, Metta, you could see a big red pathway straight across the polar, the North Pole, and that was China's so-called snow dragon icebreaker that went across there to show that it could do it.
This red thing?
That red one, yeah.
Can you see it now here?
I can't, but maybe we can remember it.
Sorry, maybe I can.
But anyway, while you're doing that,
let me try to do it again.
Okay. Well, let me just talk about the Arctic Council, because the Arctic Council has all those countries, but it also has observers. And the observers are many of the European countries who are not Arctic, such as France and Britain and also China, also India, I think South Korea. Many other countries have interest in the Arctic, and they've put forward their case that they need to be observers on the Arctic Council. So, but there's also an issue that NATO is dangerously, to my mind anyway, near to the Arctic. NATO, of course, is a country, an organization of countries under a so-called nuclear umbrella. And notice that Arctic Council observers are there, Britain and France. Also, of course, the US is there, which is an Arctic nuclear weapon, an Arctic state, and also a nuclear weapon state. So if there conflict happens, or NATO decides, oh, well, a lot of our countries are, after all, in the Arctic, and we're also members of NATO, so maybe NATO should get into the Arctic. Well, this would probably generate more military activity and could easily generate that, oh, all right, Britain and France and China all would say, well, we have nuclear weapon-equipped submarines. We'll have to go there now. And we also could notice that China, there's recently been published information about China's Navy, and they consider the Arctic already militarized, and they wish to make sure they have access to the Bering Strait. So how are they going to get access to the Bering Strait? They plan to station a lot of military hardware in the area near the Bering Strait to be absolutely sure that they can do their economic activity. So,
you mean like on ships?
On ships, yeah. And so there's nothing to say that they wouldn't decide that some of those ships should have nuclear weapons on them, or that they shouldn't put in their nuclear weapon equipped submarines, which is all an argument. And China is in a hurry, and China also is a long-term actor, that this and other factors of that sort mean if there is no attempt to say, get the submarines out of the Arctic and stop overflying the Arctic with planes equipped with nuclear weapons, it's not necessary, then the future looks worse.
So what you're advocating is some kind of agreement to keep NATO out of the Arctic. Now, I'm not sure what that would mean. NATO is a bunch of different countries.
Not really an agreement. It's simply the countries in NATO say, no, we won't go there.
Yeah,
that's the first step in a slippery slope. Is that right?
It's a call for NATO not to carry out military activities. I mean, there are four of the, I think it's four of the countries of the Arctic are NATO members. So it's there in that sense. And NATO's Article 5 applies to all of those countries. But the idea is
the thing where they all come to each other's aid. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. So, but the point is that the more that NATO enters into military exercise in the Arctic, like the big one that is on right now.
What is on right now?
A major NATO military exercise based out of Norway, and
there's something going on now.
But it's said to be the North Atlantic, but it really is awfully close or in the Arctic.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so both of you agree on this. This is
we agree on more or less everything.
Yeah.
If we have to have a cause to wind up on, to ask everybody to get behind, I assume that what you want us to promote is a resolution of some kind that we keep NATO out of the Arctic.
Well, Canada has traditionally been very cautious on NATO in the Arctic, and I think that position is easing a bit, unfortunately.
It is the countries themselves that have to have their own government or citizens do this when they are in NATO meetings. It's not individual citizens, that the governments have to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I tell you, you've halfway encouraged me and halfway depressed me because clearly the concern about the globalization or the global warming in the Arctic is something that has not been resolved and isn't going to be resolved so easily. But you've made it sound as if the concerns about sovereignty and rivalry and some of these other military ambitions that we hear about in the press may be overblown, and that there's more cooperation than we hear about. So I will take heart from that and find encouragement wherever I can get it. Next time we'll have to find some way of solving global warming in the Arctic. Anyway, our time is up, and I want to encourage our viewers to come back next week for whatever shows up next week. I think it may be Lois Wilson, actually. No, that's 2 weeks from now. I think it's another guy talking about nonviolent civil resistance next week. We will see. It hasn't been developed quite yet. But at any rate, what happens is that this is a project of Peace Magazine and Project Save the World, which is an effort to save the world from whatever needs to be saved from. And we are thinking about 6 major global threats: war and weapons, and we think mainly of nuclear in this connection, global warming, famine, pandemics, major radiation exposure, and cyber attacks. And so we have groups of people working on that. We're developing a wiki that you'll be able to read sometime in the new year, describing why certain measures should be taken. We have a list of 25 public policy changes that we think should be adopted widely, globally, in fact, and that if they are adopted, it will greatly reduce the risk of all 6 of these major global threats. So I want you to all go have a look at our webpage. It's called tosavetheworld.ca. And you can look at our platform for survival there, the list of 25 proposals that we think are important and useful. You'll endorse them, I hope. Sign them. And next week, come back, and if you don't get to watch during this particular hour, 8 to 9 Eastern time, you can see the videos later, both on the Peace Magazine Facebook page and on that webpage that I described, tosavetheworld.ca, on YouTube and some other places. So look at our list of previous discussions, and every week on Monday night, we have a conversation of this kind about some global issue. Thank you, Ernie. Thank you, Adele. It's been extremely interesting, and I appreciate your contributions to this.
Thanks a lot, Metta.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.